Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On this edition of Your Take, I talk with a British actor about his life and work. My guest is primarily a stage actor, known for his one-man show about the life and career of Kenneth Williams, called Think No Evil of Us, My Life with Kenneth Williams. Our guest's theatrical repertoire has seen him play Frankie Howerd and Noël Coward, who he also played in the BBC comedy series Goodnight Sweetheart, co-starring with Nicholas Lyndhurst. His recent successes have included stage tours of the Dad's Army radio show, A Christmas Carol, and appearances in Doctor Who and Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049. A very warm welcome on a very hot summer's night to David Benson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
for your
you
take.
for having me here. It's lovely to talk about myself. All actors love to talk about themselves, of course. And I shan't hold back. Ask me anything you want.
It's a pleasure to see you.
Yes.
Episode 11 of Your Take. And what we kind of do on the program for the next 60 minutes is we kind of take a trip back in time to your early years, find out how you got into the acting profession.
Yeah.
Influences in your life, your acting technique, your writing, performances on stage and so on. But I want to choose the current time to start with, which a difficult period, as we know, for the last 18 months with what's been happening. But I wanted to choose in recent years two successes. Dad's Army, which I mentioned in the intro.
Yes.
And the Christmas Carol tours. I want to just ask you what inspired you to choose these particular shows to recreate for the stage?
Well, I should say, first of all, Christmas Carol wasn't a tour. That was a show that happened in Horsham at the Capitol Theatre, where my very good friend and Dad's Army cohort, Jack Lane, works and has worked for many years. And we were able to mount Christmas Carol not only last year, 19, sorry, not last year, the year before, in the studio there, and it's a two-man version of the show, which we did, which worked beautifully, but of course they couldn't put a panto on last year, so they basically bumped us up to the main stage, and we expanded the whole production. There was still just two of us, plus Jack's dad, who did all the stuff backstage. But that was a wonderful thing to be involved when it came about. Jack had wanted to do that as a solo show, and eventually, because we had such fun and success doing Dad's Army as a two-man show, he said, would you be involved in that? So we did that with me playing Scrooge and him playing all the other characters. And I must say, it was a joy because we were able to do it. We were in tier 2 in West Sussex in Horsham. So we were able to continue until Christmas Eve, whereas so many other productions didn't even make the first night in London and elsewhere, which was tragic, really. But we were very fortunate. I felt almost as if the hand of God finger was pointing down and saying, you will continue. And we had a brilliant time playing to live audiences. But the Dad's Army show, now that came about, well, it really goes back to the show you mentioned before, Think No Evil of Us, my first one-man show, which is about Kenneth Williams, but also is about me. And I decided when I wrote that show 25 years ago in 1996, that I wouldn't just make it a show about Kenneth Williams, but I wanted the audience to know who I was and why, because I was a totally unknown actor who had done some fringe work, but was not known as a performer on my own. So I thought, and I was 34 years old, and I thought I really must do something before I'm 35. I felt 35 would be too late. It has to be now. So in 96, I put this show on. And in the section where I perform as myself, I describe how, as a child, I used to spend a lot of time really sequestered away in my bedroom, living in a sort of fantasy world of funny voices and comedy and old music. I used to listen to the Goon Show records. I used to collect them from the age of 11. I hope listeners or viewers will all know the Goon Show, Spike Milligan, Peter Sellers, and Harry Seacombe. Now, it's a classic, although of course there's probably 2 generations who've never even heard of it. But I grew up obsessed with it. And I used to also just watch anything on television, old movies and, you know, comedians, Morecambe and Wise, I loved and went to see. Actually, the first time I ever went to the theatre by myself, when I was 14 years old, I bought a ticket to see Morecambe and Wise at the Alexandra Theatre in Birmingham.
Wow.
They were doing what they called one of their bank raids, where they would go out and do material they'd been performing for 30 years, but in a 1-hour set. And the first half of the show was an old-time variety show. There was the Beverly Sisters, Ray Allen and Lord Charles, who remembers them, and others. And then the second half, Morecambe and Wise. And I went to the matinee and still remember every moment of it. It was one of the most thrilling, exciting afternoons of my life. And my main memory of it was just thinking, I couldn't believe they'd been performing this material 30 years. It was like they were making it up as they went along. And just the feeling of love in the house for them when they walked on stage. And at the end, when they sang Bring Me Sunshine to us, I'm actually becoming quite emotional thinking about it now. To have, as a 14-year-old, witnessed that and been in 1976, when they were at their peak, to see the great Morecambe and Wise was something I'll never regret paying my pocket money to buy that theatre ticket. So as well as Morecambe and Wise and old movies, I love Dad's Army. And I used to impersonate the characters, really not for other people's benefit, but for my own. And particularly John the Measurer, Sergeant Wilson, because he always seemed so calm. And in the chaos of my life, and not only school, but home, I used to sort of think myself into John the Measurer and sort of say, oh, you know, how awfully nice to see it. Really is an awfully attractive uniform, really lovely. You know. Yes. And so I would sort of ground myself somehow, or make myself feel better by becoming him, but secretly. Nobody really knew I was doing it in those days. So in the show, Think No Evil of Us, I do some very quick Dad's Army impressions. And I always found that people would come up to me and say, why don't you do a show about Dad's Army? And I struggled with that for many, many years. I could not think of a way of doing it on my own, a one-man show about Dad's Army, that I could say anything new about it or do anything that improved on the original, as it were. And it was only in 2017 I was asked to be in a show at the White Bear Theatre in Kennington, based on an old radio show called Men from the Ministry. And again, it was a radio performance it was like we're doing a radio show, but on stage live with an audience. So we had scripts and we read them and changed characters. And it was only then that it suddenly occurred to me, Dad's Army was done on the radio. And there's been lots of shows like Hancock's Half Hour. Hancock's Half Hour has been done as a radio show on stage around the Horn very successfully. And I thought, well, nobody's done Dad's Army, so why don't I grab it before anybody else does? So, and then I thought, Jack Lane is the perfect person to ask to do it with me as a 2-man show. Now, Jack, I had seen doing his 1-man show about Norman Wisdom, at the Capitol Theatre, Horsham, again, about 4 years before, and been blown away by it. I thought, this is the only actor I've ever seen who does what I do, who can turn into somebody else and make you believe, even though it doesn't look like Norman Wisdom, you start to think it is him, and eventually you accept. I mean, it was such an uncanny and moving performance that I knew one day I would work with him. And I rang him up and I said, Jack, are you a Dad's Army fan by any chance? And he said, oh yeah. He said, when I was a boy, I used to go to sleep and listening to the tapes of the radio show. I said, oh really? Tell me more. And he started to reel off whole bits of the dialogue. And I said, well, how would you like to do a show with me at the Edinburgh Fringe based on the old radio scripts? If we can get permission, I think you could do it very well. And he said yes. And that was the beginning of a continuing and wonderful working relationship and friendship as well, very deep friendship. We're great pals. We laugh. Touring with Jack is fantastic. We just roar with laughter all the time and never stop talking. It's a real bond. And when we get on stage, we have a blast. We thoroughly enjoy ourselves. So it's really one of the most fun and invigorating and uplifting shows I've ever done. And I never, ever get nervous, because I always think, I'm with Jack Lane. it's going to be fine. Nothing, what can go wrong? And it never, in fact, I will tell you, if it does go wrong, the audience like it even more. This is something I've learned. The audience like it if you make a mistake. And as long as you don't get flustered or thrown by it and you enjoy it too, it's actually lifts the whole show up if you just make, so don't ever worry about making a mistake. Just give it to the audience, let them enjoy it, and everybody's happy. So that's really how Dad's Army started, and we performed it last week in Middlesbrough, and we'll be performing it later this month, in fact next week at the Brasserie ZL in Piccadilly, and then are on tour with it September, October. Around the country. So it was one of the best ideas I ever had. That, you know, sometimes you get an idea and it's like, this is the one, this is going to work.
Picking up on the show, you've done over 250 shows of the radio show Dad's Army.
Have we? You've been counting?
I have indeed.
I can't believe it. Well, right. Okay.
It's such an iconic, it's almost like a national British institution.
Oh,
the
yes.
programme is still being aired today. Were there sort of concerns from the outset that you could bring the show justice and these much loved characters when you started coming up with the whole concept?
Yes, James, that was a huge issue. You know, but the thing is, we both love Dad's Army, and we thought we're going to do this as faithfully as we can. We're not going to send it up or try and do anything clever with it. We come out with the scripts in front of us, rather like musicians with a music stand. He stands 2 meters away from me, and I'm here with my script. Cool. And we just start to read with sound effects at the right place and the vintage music, of course, to break up the scenes. And I think because we just felt we're doing this with the right attitude, with love, we hoped, well, we were very nervous at first, you know, you are taking on something that's sacred, really. But from the very beginning, the response was overwhelmingly positive. I don't think we've ever had anything say anything horrid about it. The critics have all loved it, and the audience have loved it, and so have we. So, and the main thing is that the people themselves who are involved, like the Croft family, David Croft, who co-wrote it, his family, who now control the estate and are very strict about who is allowed to perform and do Dad's Army and who isn't, came to see it and they absolutely loved it. As did people like Frank Williams, who played the vicar, you know. Really, Mr. Man, Mr. Gateman, do be quiet, you silly little man. You know, all that. He's lovely, delightfully, still sounds exactly the same now at the age of 90 as he did then. And many other people who were involved with the show along the way came and gave it their thumbs up, as it were. And so we thought, well, we're doing something right here, because we are just showing our love for the show, and to hear audiences recognizing the characters as we get to each one. Jack plays Mannering, Jones and Pike, and many other characters, including Mrs. Pike. And I play Wilson and Godfrey. I say, I could be excused, Captain Mannering, and Fraser, and many Hodges, you know, he's just rather boorish character, and the vicar and the verger and all these characters, whatever comes up in the script. Mrs. Fox, we play male and female characters. And we don't have to dress up. We do it all vocally and with gestures.
Sure.
And so it saves a huge amount of money because you don't need a set. Very important, though, actually, I want to make a point about this, because what the show does is invite the audience to use their imagination. And what people always say to us after they've seen the show is, we closed our eyes and we could see everything. And that always delights me, because they're listening to us, they're watching us, but there's like a film going on in their head where they can see the church hall, they can see all the characters, they can see everything that's familiar in their mind's eye. And it becomes as real almost as watching the television, except more so because this time they're involved. And if they laugh, we respond to their laughs just like they do on the television. You know, they're playing to the audience. And so I'm very much an advocate for the imagination, as it were. I think a lot of theatre and obviously movies, you watch it, but you don't need to visualize, you don't need to go into your mind's eye. But when you're a child or being read a story, or when you're listening to the radio, you have pictures in your mind. Everybody has slightly different pictures. And I love that. I think that's so important for human beings, because the imagination is the key to creativity, to what makes us human. The ability to visualize things in your mind, literally ideas, that's what the word idea literally means, is something that can be pictured in the mind, an image that can be summoned up. And that's something human beings can do. I don't know if other animals can do it. I suspect they don't, but well, they don't need to. But human beings can, for instance, visualize a project and then make it real, make it happen by stage, bringing something that's an idea on paper or in the mind into reality. And that's how all creativity has worked since the beginning of time. And we need to nurture it, because I fear this internet, telephones, mobiles, iPads. I mean, you see babies in their prams holding iPads now. And I sometimes wonder if their imagination, the inner eye, is being stimulated in the way it was for us who come from the past where there was no internet. What do you think?
A very different world. From the current to going back to the past, we've mentioned and touched upon Kenneth Williams being a huge influence in your career. I wanted to come back to kind of an early breakthrough from when you were a young boy back in 1975, when you were only 13. You wrote a story.
You can figure out from that how old I am now. He was 59. All right, go on. That's right.
You wrote a story called The Rag and Bone Man for the BBC children's television series Jackanory, which won a competition. Can you just give us a bit of history about that and what happened?
Well, they had this competition every year. I think it was every year or every other year. And I saw it announced and I thought, right, this is my opportunity, because I was so, as I told you, obsessed with Spike Milligan and the Goon Show. I lived in this world of Milligan to the extent that all my schoolwork was full of jokes, Milligan-esque humor. I wasn't interested in facts or in getting the homework right. All I wanted to do was make the teachers laugh when they got home and read my work and send it up. I was almost, I suppose, sending up the homework in a way. And I would put silly little puns and jokes in my biology homework and things. And of course I'd get in trouble and the teachers were very concerned. I remember the teacher coming up to me. This was in Birmingham. I went to a school called Park Hall in Castle Bromwich, Birmingham. Not a posh school, just a, a comprehensive school. And he said, David, we very much enjoy marking your homework. We look forward to receiving it. We pass it around amongst our friends, actually, which I thought was absolutely amazing. I was so pleased. But he said, you must not allow your idiosyncrasies to enter the examination hall or your mark is going to plummet. And he was right. My marks were terrible, because even in the examination hall, I was still sending up the question and writing kind of jokes. Now, of course, I suppose if they'd realized that, they should have maybe realized that was my forte, that was what my passion was, and encouraged it. But of course at school they just need to get you through the curriculum, and so they tried to squash it. So it was up to me really to find my own way to express it. And when the competition was announced, I thought, this is going to be an opportunity for me to write something, send it in and see what happens. So I wrote the story, literally one draft off the top of my head, based on something I'd read in my dad, a story was in the paper about a man who'd found something of great value and had it valued, Saxon sword or something like that, and made a huge amount of money from it. So I wrote a story about a man, Arthur Rencher, who ran the Merksbury Steam Museum. And the joke is it had nothing whatsoever to do with steam, but it was still called the Steam Museum. And this museum was on hard times. So he went out for a walk and meets a rag and bone man and says to him, do you have anything on your wagon which might be of great value, which you don't know about and would be willing to sell to me for 50 pence? And the rag and bone man says, I'll have a look. And he says, well, I've got an Egyptian mummy. Will that do? 50 pence, there you go, take it. So he does, and the mummy becomes an enormous hit at the museum, but eventually becomes bored, being stared at by people all day, and tells Arthur that he's leaving to become a sailor. Now that joke actually comes from Winnie the Pooh, because there was one point where Piglet in one of the stories says he's going to leave the area and run away to become a sailor, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, the idea of this piglet becoming a sailor. So I stole that joke and put it in my story for the mummy. Anyway, so I wrote the story very much Milligan-esque, and hoping, my secret hope was that Spike Milligan might be the guest reader that year and would read my story, or Peter Sellers would have been all right, I would have accepted, or Harry Seacombe. And I was mortified when I got a letter from the BBC, Daphne Jones, the producer, saying, your story has been selected for the shortlist. And we'll let you know. And then the next week came a letter saying, you are one of the winners and your story will be read by Kenneth Williams on Wednesday, the 10th of December. Now, there was a whole week of stories. And there were two actors in the studio who'd read everybody else's story, but every day there was one star spot. And that was Kenneth Williams. I got the Wednesday Kenneth Williams slot. And that was cut away. They were in the studio and they would pick up a phone, dial, and then you'd cut to a piece of film of Kenneth Williams riding in the back of a limousine. He would pick up and say, hello, yeah, it's the Wagon Bear Man, yes, all right, yes. Put the phone down. And he got out of the car and recited my story, holding up the pictures which I had drawn and sent in. He actually held them up on the screen. I would kill to see that now, but there's no film of it that's long since been wiped from the BBC archives. However, there is a sound recording. It's tragic. It really is. I really would love to see it so much. But there is a sound recording I made on a tape recorder, one of those old-fashioned, just, big buttons that you press down. I held it up to the television, and that tape, which still plays to this day, by the way, is the only recording of that, and it's a very precious recording. So Kenneth Williams read the story. He did all the wrong voices as far as I was concerned. I was furious. I was so embarrassed because he camped it up. You see, I heard Milligan doing it, or Harry Seacombe, but I didn't hear these very sort of camp voices he gave to all the characters. Now, I was going to this Birmingham comprehensive school. You can imagine the reaction at school next day. I was now associated in the minds of my fellow pupils with the campest man in Britain. And that was all right, except that I was struggling with my own sexuality at the time. When you're 13 and you suddenly starts to dawn on you, oh, you're not supposed to fancy, your school friends and the teachers, the football teacher and all that. You're supposed to fancy girls. And I just didn't, and I couldn't help it. And I was mortified. I thought, this is terrible. What am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this terrible situation? I was trying to change somehow, but I didn't know how. Eventually, I just gave into it. It was only when I left school and left home that I was able to relax and had the attitude by that point, well, if anyone's got a problem with it, it's their problem, because this is me. I didn't choose it, and I like who I am. And if anybody doesn't like it, well, that's up to them. I always think if somebody doesn't like me, there's something wrong with them. It's the best attitude.
From that early experience of winning the competition, and ironically later you would go on to play Kenneth Williams, which we've already discussed. But what age did you think to yourself, I really want to make it as a professional actor and earn a living from doing these kind of things?
It's the only thing I ever really wanted to do, but it took me years to get to it. I didn't want to go to drama school. A lot of my friends did. I did do a degree at London University. It was then a new course at Royal Holloway College called Theatre Studies, where you were basically studying academically the text, but you would get to do in-house student productions, and that's what I lived for. I wanted to perform, but I just felt somehow I didn't want to go the route of going to drama school and be taught something that I felt I knew how to do. And it took me years and years of frustration. I just felt somehow that I would find my way there by my own route, and I would do it my way. And the way that happened was that after many years, I packed a bag when I was 23 and went to live in Edinburgh, where I didn't know anybody. I did it really because I was in a rut. I'd been through university. I was office temping, very miserable. And I thought, I'm going to pack up a bag and just go and start my life somewhere new.
I wanted to come on to your experiences in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Was that kind of a period where you were starting to learn the acting trade? Were you working for various kind of theatre groups and performing on the stage? What kind of happened during that time? And what kind of years are we talking? What kind of decade here?
Well, I went to Edinburgh in 1980, late 85, and I started working in a bookshop which was called Lavender Menace. It was a
Sure.
political, lesbian, gay, sexual politics
Hmm.
bookshop. And that was so, and they gave me a Saturday job, and then I became a full-time member of staff. And it was a very important part, actually, of my personal development and becoming, it's such a leap from where I was at school to by this point, working in a bookshop and being there for other people who were gay, and lesbian, who were coming into the shop to buy books and to talk. Because it became a lifeline. In fact, there has been a show written about Lavender Menace since, with people playing characters based on me and the others, which is an extraordinary. It's part of history now, and I'm very proud of that. It was a difficult time because we were often raided by the Scottish police, who thought we were looking for porn or whatever. It was people forget that it was not an easy time. The law and the government was at that point hostile. Now they're all supposed to be our friends, but I never really believed them, because my memories of them not being our friends at all. Anyway, that sort of appealed to the combative part of my nature. But it was while I was working in the bookshop that a man came in off the street. This was a shop that everybody used. It wasn't just lesbian and gay people. It was, little old ladies, Morningside ladies would come in and buy postcards, that we sold. And people bought general books. And a man called Jeremy Weller came in, and he said, after talking to me a couple of times, he said, look, I'm doing my first, I'm directing a show on the Edinburgh Fringe next year, and I'd like you to be in it. I know you're not a professional actor, but I work with non-professionals. And he said, I think you could play a part in the show. And I said, yes, of course. I jumped at it. It was only when I got to the first rehearsal, really, that I realized that this was something quite extraordinary. The play was called Glad. This was 1990. And it was a play in which almost all the cast were homeless people from Edinburgh who he and his team had found and nurtured and done workshops with already. And I'm talking about old guys, drunks and what have you. I mean, I don't want to put them down by saying that, but one of the most wonderful characters in the show was a complete alcoholic called Terry Rigby, who was about 60 at the time, my age now, funnily enough, and had spent most of his life sheltering from the rain in the library, and had the most incredible mind. And he could quote Wilde and Shaw and Shakespeare and many, many other writers, and knew history inside out, and had this wonderful way of talking. And Jeremy found him on the street with his hat on the floor, quoting Shakespeare for the festival crowds as a sort of street theatre to get money to buy a can of Carlsberg Special. He didn't beg, he would recite Shakespeare. I mean, that was the kind of character they found for the show. And young guys, young methadone addicts and what have you, all amazing people who we became a family. And I rehearsed with them for 6 weeks. I played the warden of the hostel in which they stayed. And it was an explosive show that absolutely took the Fringe by storm that year, and ended up touring to East Berlin, to Bonn, Paris, and Dublin with the same cast. And the show was basically would just continue off stage just as it was on. These men were playing themselves. They were playing, some of them couldn't read or write, but they all knew their lines because they were lines that they had evolved through improvisation. And everybody knew what their part was. And the show was, every night was electrifying. And I felt so grateful to be part of that, because I felt I was getting an acting education, as it were, that you would never get in a drama school. In fact, people who were studying at drama school came to see it and said, how do we get involved with something like this? I wish we were doing so, because what we're doing at drama school is, we're doing all the usual stuff, but this is what we wish we were doing. And I felt at that point, I'm really glad I didn't go to drama school, and that I'm just by chance, I've been led into this fantastic, extraordinary work, which, became legendary, really. And I did several shows with Jeremy Weller, including one called Mad, M-A-D, in 1992, which really was the one that changed my life. That was a play about, again, improvised over many weeks of intense improvisation. And it was about essentially mental health issues, particularly as affected young women. So all the actresses in the cast had some experience of breakdown, mental health problems, and were in the show telling their own stories, and I was involved as a supposedly neutral character, but who then reveals his own issues, which was the first time I talked about my mother and what happened with my mother when I was a boy, which was that essentially she suddenly, when I was 5, just suddenly became a different person, became paranoid schizophrenic in a violent and terrifying way. And that was something that had obviously is the prime experience of my life. And I think the thing that at the age of 5 completely made me who I was, or set me on a path. I mean, I often think, what would my life have been like had she not gone mad? Who would I be? Would I have done the work I did? Would I be the strange, fractured person that I am? You know, I'm still struggling with it. I love my mother very much, but it was hard work to be a child with that going on for 10 years of my mother getting more and more mad until eventually she was sectioned, taken away.
Comedy's played such a huge part in your career, and during our conversation we've already established the links with Kenneth Williams. You played Noël Howerd in Goodnight
Goodnight,
Sweetheart,
yeah.
The television series which
that was an amazing break. Yeah.
At the beginning. What is it about these comedy icons that have inspired you? And also they're quite very three-dimensional characters as well, that have had insecurities and problems of their own. Is that something that's kind of interested you as well about playing them?
I think so. I think I'm always looking for connections between myself and whoever I'm interested in playing. And it's interesting that it's been comedians often, not always. I did one-man show, which was not funny at all, which was about the Lockerbie bombing, a show called Lockerbie Unfinished Business, in which I played Jim Swire, whose daughter was on the plane and who was still campaigning for justice and to get the truth of what actually happened. So I felt a great connection with him and inspiration and admiration for Jim Swire. And I wanted to do a show that set the record straight, because I couldn't bear the fact that the media and the politicians were lying about it. I can't stand that. And I just thought, I have a chance as a fringe actor to do a show where I can tell the truth in a way that I probably couldn't if I was doing it on the BBC. There would be lawyers saying you can't say this, and but as a fringe actor, you can get up and say what you want. Let them stop you. You're doing it all on your own money anyway. So I put it on. The show was a great success and got huge press and coverage and won an award, which I was thrilled about, and helped the campaign. So I do shows about whatever's interesting me at the time. The last one I did was in 2019, the last one-man show, and that was about the Cato Street plot of 1820, which very few people know anything about, but it was events that happened in Britain 200 years ago, 201 years ago, when a group of radical men, or that's how they're characterized, decided they were going to take on the government, actually murder the entire cabinet of the day, and start a provisional government, a people's government. So I thought that was a fascinating subject, and it had great parallels with what was happening in 2019, where most of the public seemed to be very hostile to the government. But anyway, I try and vary what I do, and it's not all comedy at all. But the fact that I'm always looking for, what's behind the comedy. Someone like Frankie Howerd was a very, in some ways, disturbed man, traumatized by his sexuality, I think, as was Kenneth Williams. And yet they made it into comedy. Kenneth used to say that it was the job of a comedian to turn a private misery into comedy. And he certainly did that. He would take his own ailments, his own unhappiness, and make it hilarious. But it wasn't really funny to him. As we know from reading his diaries, he himself found life very hard indeed. And I do as well.
From your experience as a gay actor, and you mentioned about growing up in Edinburgh, not growing up, but being there at a certain time where it was difficult. And you mentioned those characters like Frankie Howerd and Kenneth Williams.
Yes.
You obviously now live in a more liberal society.
Yes.
do you feel things have changed completely to say 20, 30 years? What is your perspective going back then when you were kind of learning the ropes to the kind of the world we live in today?
Yeah.
What the
Well, yes, of course, it's
changes you've
changed.
seen?
Yeah, I think you can see with young people now, they have a totally different perspective on sexuality, gender that we did in our day. We're kind of dinosaurs, really, and we're having to catch up now with a new generation who have, in a sense, we fought those battles so that they don't have to think about them now. Well, it's just not an issue if you're gay. And indeed, it's something to be celebrated. And, you know, I'm one of those old troopers who went through the mill with, you know, against, well, when I was young, you had to be 21 to be gay, you know, which seems incredible now. But now I have great hope that that is a thing of the past. In this country, anyway, of course, every country is different. Every culture is different. And even within this country, it's not always okay to be gay. It depends, you know, where you are and what your background is. But things have changed radically, absolutely. And who would have thought gay marriage would become, from a Tory government would bring in gay marriage, when I remember Tory government bringing in Clause 28, which we found extremely hostile and frightening at the time, and we fought against. So things have changed in extraordinary ways that I could never have predicted back then, but it's good, and I'm very glad that they have.
With regard to the creative process, you've been involved in pretty much everything from staging productions to the script writing to the acting. Is there a particular discipline you enjoy the most? And my second question was, of all the areas you've worked in, from stage to television, you've also dabbled in film acting as well. Which one do you enjoy the most and why?
Oh, I think stage is the best because that's the most immediate. And if you're doing a run, you have a chance to improve it night by night, hopefully. And it's a nightly experiment and conversation with a group of strangers. I've done a little bit of telly 20 years ago or more. In fact, I did Goodnight Sweetheart, which came about because Lawrence Marks and Maurice Gran, who wrote and created that show, saw a performance of Think No Evil of Us, my Kenneth Williams show. And it was a particularly wonderful audience, and they approached me after the show and said, we'd like to work with you. To my astonishment, because I'd never done any television, and they wrote me a plum part in a big, high-rating series working with Nicholas Lyndhurst, who I never dreamed I would get to meet, let alone work with someone like him. But it didn't go on to a television career, which I thought it might. I was disappointed because I thought I might now be on call and might be castable on television, but that didn't happen. I've done the odd little thing here and there, the odd scene, but not for years. For some reason, television, my face doesn't fit. I don't know what it is. Or maybe I'm just not ambitious enough. I haven't pushed myself enough. I've also, one of the main things I think that I've learned about Kenneth Williams and Frankie, I think particularly, was how fame tortured them. How difficult it was for someone like Kenneth, who was an extremely sensitive man, to constantly be pointed at and looked at in the street and have people going, oh, go on, carry on, Kenny, go on, stop messing about. And he hated it. And I think I've always wanted to avoid that if possible. So in a way, I've had a successful career in that I have worked, but I've never become the sort of person who is pestered in the street or can't go into a restaurant without everybody knowing I'm there. I'm anonymous, and actually I prefer that. But I like to work as well, so it's a difficult balance, you know, that you have to try and tread or find as an actor. Do you want to be a great big star, or do you want to be a private individual who gets up on stage and can do it, I think, better than the others personally, but you know, that's only my opinion. And no, I shouldn't say that. There's lots of brilliant performers, almost as good as I am, but I do it my own way. I'm not trained. I work from the heart, and I do work from instinct and from skill and from everything I've learned, experience. But I think I'm as professional as anyone. And of course, the big break I had, apart from Goodnight Sweetheart, was being cast in a show at the National Theatre about 10 years ago called One Man, Two Governors, where I found myself on stage every night with James Corden in one scene, which was the knockout comedy scene of the show. the big scene before the interval, which left the audience every night in pieces. I mean, just the meltdown laughter, the roars of laughter that came from that scene were incredible. And, you know, I did that for 3 years. I did over 1,000 performances of that show. After James Corden and the original cast moved on, I stayed, and I was very proud that I, you know, broke records. I think I was the longest, almost the longest serving actor at the Haymarket Theatre, where we did 2 years run.
Coming back to television, which you mentioned, and a famous movie franchise as well, you were involved in Doctor Who, and you worked with Denis Villeneuve, the acclaimed director, on Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly tell us about your experiences on Doctor Who and the Blade Runner sequel?
Well, Doctor Who was one scene in an episode written by Mark Gatiss, who many viewers will know who I mean by Mark Gatiss, League of Gentlemen, Sherlock and all that. I've known since before he was famous. And he wrote a nice character that I was able to use my voice in. It was a herald. It was all shot outdoors. There was one scene in the show, and that was enough to get me invited to Doctor Who conventions to sign autographs for the rest of my life.
Very nice.
But the Denis Villeneuve and Blade Runner 2049 sounds terribly grand, but in fact, it was a bit of a disappointment. Like many actors, really, probably since movies began, I went to see the film and realized that most of what I'd done had been cut and ended up on the cutting room floor. And it was such a shame. I was playing a hologram of Liberace. And so they had this costume that was a Liberace stage opera with a big white fur cape that went right across the floor with a silver sequin lining and a white suit with diamante. And they made me up to look exactly like him. And we did this. They said, well, we'd like you to film a sequence where you do a big entrance on stage. And I said, okay, let me think about it. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, this costume they've made is so big, this cape, that if I run onto the stage and stop, it will come up behind me. And then I can raise my hands and go, and do that. You know, Liberace. So I did, and we filmed it, and they loved it. Everyone applauded on the set and said it was brilliant. That's going to be the hit of this movie. I went to see the film, and it had all gone. There was one little tiny sequence lasting about 3 seconds where you see me in the background playing the piano as Liberace, while Harrison Ford is prowling through this set with a gun. Sure. Looking
I know the scene. Yeah,
you see Marilyn, you see Elvis, and you see others, and you see a little glimpse of Liberace, and that's all that was left of me in the movie. So it was a terrible disappointment to me to see the film with my friend Tom Eden, who was in One Man, Two Governors with me. We sat there watching, and I said to him, "Do you know what? They've cut it. That's it." And there was nothing I could do. You had no control. That's why I prefer stage work, because you have control over what you're doing. On television or film, you have no control over it, and they might indeed cut you out, as they did. So that was a disappointment, but at least I'm in the credits.
Before we come to the final set of questions, I just wanted to ask, is there any shows that you would love to perform on stage?
Oh.
And what are kind of your future plans? We're kind of in a position now where things are starting to go back to some sense of normality. We hope.
I don't know. Yeah, touch wood. I think it's very hard now to actually guess what's going to happen next. We're in an unknowable situation, so I can't guarantee we're going to be touring the autumn. Who knows? Anything might happen. So we're but in an ideal world, we'll be on tour with Dad's Army. I could do that forever, quite happily. To be honest, what else would I like to do? I'm not sure. Maybe a great big musical or something, or something else like One Man, Two Governors. It's a great big smash hit where you get big laughs every night, and somebody else does the hard work, writing it, directing it, and all the lighting. You just show up and do your good performance and hope for the best. But I suppose it'd be nice to have a really good dramatic part. All comic actors really want to play dramatic parts, you know. And I could, particularly with this lighting I've got at the moment, I could quite easily play Hannibal Lecter or something. It'd be nice to have a good film part where I really get to show off what I can do. But I've done a lot of what I want to do. I've written, anytime I've done 10 one-man shows, and it's always something that's on my mind, something I'm interested in. I think I maybe got one more good one-man show left in me. I'm thinking about that. and that would be quite a big thing. I want to tackle somehow a show that tackles as you know, everyone's very polarized at the moment. Opinion is very polarized. People take what you call zero tolerance positions on things, where they're right and everyone else is wrong. And that's very dangerous, I think, because that's where all conflict comes from. And I would like to do a show that somehow addresses that, but in a way that makes people laugh. And I haven't figured out how to do it, but that's kind of on my mind.
So, David, we come to the final set of questions. These are just quick fire questions.
Yes.
First one, what's your favorite pastime?
Well, right now I love walking in nature with, on my own or with the dog, or just being surrounded by the beautiful things of nature. Having been in London for so long, now I'm in Wales, and it's an absolute treat to be here and be able to get out and go to the beach or go to the, just be in fields and trees and breathing in nature, I think is the sweetest pastime I could wish for.
Next one, what's your favorite film and why?
The one that springs right to my mind is The Wizard of Oz. The moral of it, the whole journey of it is profoundly philosophical, and I just love Judy Garland. Isn't that typical? But I do. I think she's endlessly fascinating and so beautiful, and her performance in that film is so from the heart. And the final message of it, that you have to find your own way. When she says, why didn't you tell me right at the beginning that if I clicked my heels together, I could have gone home? And the witch says, you had to find it out for yourself. And that is really this journey that all of us have to make of enlightenment.
From films now to novels, who would you say is your favorite novelist?
Well, I like funny books, if they make me laugh. And I think you probably have to say Charles Dickens, because it's got humor, but also the real depth of real passion for people and for justice, I think, really, I would say. There's such a moral, strong moral base to Dickens. I think he's endlessly readable. And I think you can't do better than Charles Dickens.
I think that's a wonderful choice.
Yes.
If you could have had a different profession, what would it have been and why?
I suppose I would have been a teacher, maybe, because I like communicating. I think anywhere where you're talking with, I'm a people person, and I like to communicate with people. And I think acting is a very different form of teaching in a way. So probably teaching, or maybe I would have been a chef or a cook, something creative, definitely. But I couldn't consider myself as anything other than what I am,
Who would you say has been your greatest inspiration in life?
In my whole life?
Yes.
I think my granddad, who was, on my father's side, Arthur Hodgson. He was the headmaster of the Wren's Nest School in Dudley for 40 years, but he was a passionate amateur actor. And he also set up the Dudley Little Theatre, because he was, again, like me, I feel I'm almost living the life he would like to have lived. But there's a lot of my granddad in me. He was always acting, doing funny voices and being different characters. And it amused me very much as a child, as a teenager. I miss him very much to this day. My dear granddad, who was Arthur Hodgson, who was born in 1906 and died in, I think, 1980. And he was a brilliant man. I loved him.
Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
Well, I don't anymore. I'm afraid I've gone off them all. But I suppose if I had to, it would be The Guardian, but I don't really like that anymore. I don't consider myself a Guardian reader, but I dislike all newspapers. I like to get my news from people and, from what they tell me about what's going on in the world. I don't trust the news at all. So, yeah, I'm a cynic.
Next one, what's your favorite food?
Well, the thing that springs into my mind, it has to be the first thing you think of, doesn't it? A great big bowl of pasta and spaghetti bolognese. I think when you're hungry, there's nothing finer than a great big bowl of spaghetti bolognese. Sorry, vegetarians. You can have vegan mince as well, with cheese on top.
You can say this, and I look forward to hearing it. What is your favorite curse word?
Do you want me to say it?
You can say it indeed.
My favorite curse word?
Yes.
Well, I suppose the one that still packs a punch is cunt, but it's become quite prosaic. I mean, you can say it on Play School now, I think. I mean, yeah, it's the one that has the most impact, but it's overused. And I think, what everybody says fucking all the time, don't they? So
They do.
yeah. But we need to find new curse words, something that shocks that they haven't heard. But the old ones are the best when it comes to the ancient Saxon, Anglo-Saxon ones are still the best curse words.
Every other
To enumerate them.
Every other guest has seemed to have chosen the F word. We go from the curse word to your favorite place. What's your favorite place or holiday destination?
Well, I have to say Tenby, where I live right now. Wherever I am is my favorite place. That sounds a bit of a get out, but I don't have a favorite. I love so many places. Somewhere it's warm and there's a sea. So I was living in Hastings not so long ago. Now I'm living in Tenby, and I love anywhere where there's sea and fresh air and beautiful clear air like you get here. It's clear skies. So I think South Wales, Pembrokeshire is pretty good.
Who is your favorite music artist and what's your favorite album?
Oh, that's very, very difficult. When I was a teenager, I used to go and see all my favorite singers, Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, Peggy Lee. These were and still are my favorites, and I was privileged to see them. But I would probably say the key one was Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire changed my life when I was 13. I saw him on television and immediately started collecting every record of his I could find. As a Birmingham schoolboy, I was versed in what they now call the Great American Songbook, because every great songwriter wrote for Fred Astaire, and his list of songs is the great songs of that era. So, and I love him as a person, as a dancer, everything. So I would say Fred Astaire, and thank you, Mr. Astaire.
And we come down to the last two. Firstly, what's your greatest achievement to date?
I would say Think No Evil of Us, doing my first one-man show and taking myself from total obscurity to relative obscurity. No, doing that show really was everything in my life had been leading up to that point, and it took me from obscurity to the West End of London where I performed it. And I think if I hadn't done that, then everything that followed, all the wonderful things that followed from that would not have happened. And I couldn't have imagined my life without having done Think No Evil of Us. That was it, yes, definitely.
And lastly, David Benson, how do you wish to be remembered?
I think as someone who was on a journey to understand my life, and in doing so helped other people and inspired other people to do their own work. There are at least two artists I can think of who do one-man shows now, who do them because they saw me do them years ago. And I think that is something I'm very, very proud of. I'm just someone who was compassionate generally and did it his own way. And I think for all of us, that's my key to everybody watching: do it your own way.
A very nice way to end. Thank you for this evening, for joining us on Your Take and sharing your life experience, your comedy heroes, the one-man show. We got there in the end. We did have a few technical hitches along the way.
Yes.
Thank you to the desires of technology, hence the wireless internet. But thank you kindly. And where can we see David Benson in 2021 on the stage?
Well, on stage, you can see me in the autumn, going around the country, September, October, with Dad's Army radio show with Jack Lane on many different venues. If you Google it, you'll find us. And otherwise, you can come to Tenby and you'll find me working in the Cornish Bakehouse pasty shop on the High Street in Tenby. And I'd like to think I can turn my hand to anything if necessary.